It's great to see all of you guys here tonight. I'm going to go through a quick presentation, a little bit about us, but I have some housekeeping rules as well. So first of all, you heard Charles. If you need credits for tonight, this is 1.5 in-person credits, so if you are collecting credits and need credits, please make sure that first blue table there is a sign-in sheet to sign in for credits. It's different from the sign-in sheet at the front door, so I want to make sure I remind you of that. And the next thing I want to tell you guys is we have a great program coming up. I'm going to talk a little bit about it at the end, but we have a great program coming up next week as well. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up for that program, I'm going to give you some information about that, but we'd love to see you all there as well. And then finally, for my friend Adrian, who you're going to get to see here in a minute. Where's Adrian? We put all of our events and we really connect with all of our members on LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn is where you can find all of our information beside our website. So if you do not currently follow us on LinkedIn, please follow us. And I'm sure maybe some of you have taken a picture tonight and you will see your face on LinkedIn because he does a great job documenting all of our events. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn tonight. So before I get started, I want to thank our host facility tonight for, one, hosting us and for the beautiful spread of food back there. We always appreciate having partners who will host our events and invite us in and provide a nice meal for us. So thank you so much to the Broward Health North team. And I'm going to invite Matt up here to give a little welcome from his facility. So Matt is one of our board members. He'll introduce himself. He's been on our board for the past 2 years now, an active member of ACHE and also a fellow. He's going to talk a little bit about Broward Health North.
Thank you, Rula. So welcome everybody to Broward Health North. Again, my name is Matt Garner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer. I've been in the role for about 2 years now. And so just tell you a little bit about Broward Health North. And we've been serving this community since 1961. Licensed with 409 beds, some very key services with our Level 2 Trauma Center, Inpatient Rehab Unit, Cardiac Services, Comprehensive Stroke Center, all the high acuity services, very proud of that. But I also want to call out the fact that we're actually the highest rated hospital for Google reviews in all of South Florida, so 4.6 stars, so very, very nice. And we're also a leapfrog A-rated hospital, meaning that we provide some of the safest care here in the county. Again, one of only 3 hospitals in all of Broward County actually got that rating, so very proud of what the team did to achieve that. Again, the topic of the panel today, I'm very excited to hear a little bit more about. I know there was a county-wide drill yesterday with the heat shield exercise. So emergency management is always a priority for hospital operations, especially as we had the hurricane season, it's top of mind. So very excited to hear what some of our subject matter experts here on the panel have to share with us tonight. But again, hope you guys enjoy the food, and thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you so much, Matt. So I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. Thank you guys for coming back, and for the new faces, welcome, and we're glad to have you as part of our chapter. So I'm going to give you a little brief overview about the chapter, for those of you who don't know, or maybe this is your first event. I probably know it by heart, so I'll try to go through. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so first of all, our chapter cannot do what we do without our very generous sponsors. And on this slide here is all of our 2024 sponsors. And I'm going to call out a few of our platinum sponsors, Airmark Healthcare, who I think is on our panel tonight as moderator. There she is. And I'll introduce Jessica in just a little bit. Beck, Florida Blue, Leantoss Memorial Healthcare System, and Nova Southeastern University. So thank you to our platinum sponsors. We also have our gold sponsors, Baptist Health, Baxter, Broward Health, thank you, Kendall Health, FAU, the Executive Master's Program, Nicholas Children's Hospital, Pontoran, UHealth, University of Miami Health System, and then also University of Miami, the Business School for the Department of Health Management and Policy, Vitas Healthcare, and Wellington Regional. Thank you to our gold sponsors. And our silver sponsors up there, Barry University, Cleveland Clinic, FIU, Jackson Health System, Miami-Dade, and South Florida Hospital and Healthcare Association. And then, of course, our media partners and supporters, the Broward County Medical Association, the Dade County Medical Association, and, of course, South Florida Hospital News and Healthcare Report. Again, thank you so much to our sponsors. We couldn't do what we do without our sponsors. They are very generous. They provide a place for us to host our events, and then they also fund a lot of the things that we get to do as a chapter. All right, so our vision, our mission, our values, if you're familiar with our chapter or ACHE, we really strive to live by these vision, mission, and values, and it's very important to us as our chapter to make sure that we provide for our members what these things are. So I'll give you, you're going to take a look at it there, I won't read through. To our board of directors, for our board members in the room tonight, can you stand or raise your hand if you're already standing? All right, thank you guys. So our board members, it's a 20-person volunteer board. This is a very active board. We meet monthly and everybody gets really involved, whether it's for sponsorship or education events, speaking. We could not do what we do without our board. If any of you are new to the chapter and want to learn more about the chapter, look for one of these board members. They'll tell you all about it. And also, if any of you are interested in pursuing your fellowship, one of the board members could also talk to you about that. So thank you so much to our board members here tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about our national chapter for those of you who don't know. ACHE is a large association, over 49,000 members, 76 chapters across the United States, providing over 300,000 hours of education and networking. The website for ACHE has over 8 million web visitors, and you can see some of the other things, huge social media following. It is the preeminent healthcare organization nationally. And then our local chapter, there you go. Our local chapter, we're the 9th largest chapter in the nation, something we're very proud of. We're a very active chapter, over 1,000 members, 140 fellows, and I believe growing. I know a couple people here are currently either going to be sitting for their test soon or studying now, so we always are excited to get some new fellows. 266 student members. Do we have any student members in the audience tonight? Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much. So if you guys get with one of our board members, we'd love to welcome you to the chapter if this is your first event. And then, like I mentioned, LinkedIn, we are very active on LinkedIn. I think I have to update that number. I think we might be more than 4,000 members thanks to the great work that Adrian does. And hopefully some of you tonight will get us over that number as well. So we post all of our events and everything that we do on LinkedIn. So like I said, please follow us. My friend back there, Adrian, loves to hear that I'm promoting our LinkedIn. All right, so for those of you, again, who are new, or maybe this is, you haven't been to an event in a long time, we believe the importance of what we do is really about networking, education, and getting involved. We host, like I mentioned, we have another event coming up, which I'll talk to you a little bit about, but we host these education events. We try to host one at least once a month, and we try to do our networking events at least once a quarter. We love to get healthcare professionals together. We want you guys to feel like your membership, you guys are taking opportunity of your membership, so please get involved. We love to see you guys at our events. If you're not a member, I think probably everyone in here is, but if you're not a member, like I said, talk to one of the board members. We'd love to welcome you into our chapter. A lot of people, like I mentioned, join our chapter in order to pursue their fellowship. Let me ask you a question. How many fellows do we have in the room, if you don't mind raising your hand? Yeah, a large portion of people. How many people are actively working on their fellowship? Woohoo! Well, we would love to welcome you into that club. So again, any help you need from the chapter, we are looking at doing some study sessions as a chapter, so you'll get all that information either through your email or on our LinkedIn. But definitely a board certification, the FACHE credential is something that's recognized all throughout, I think the United States, and something that's definitely something to strive for. So anything we can do as a board member or chapter to help those of you who are pursuing your fellowship, please reach out to us. We'd love to help. All right. If you haven't followed our LinkedIn, here's your opportunity to scan that QR code and become one of our newest followers. Thank you so much. All right, and then later on tonight, we will ask you guys to fill out a survey, and you can scan this QR code. We'll put that back up. I think I might have one more slide. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, so I thought I'd put a slide in here. So next week, we have an event that we've been promoting both by email and on our LinkedIn. It is a leadership roundtable event. These are one of our signature events. We usually do one a year, but this year we decided to do two. So we have a great group of leaders, kind of in a speed dating style. The event is next week on Friday in the morning. We're doing it at the Renaissance in Broward off of 595. We have, I think, 9 or 10 Medicine and General have planned the event, and they're kind of spearheading that. We have 9 or 10 great healthcare leaders who are going to be sitting at tables, and then we're going to have people move around, so kind of like a speed dating event. We do this once a year with CEOs in the area, but this year we decided to do it with, we're going to do a CEO event as well, but we decided to do it with some other healthcare leaders. So any of you who are interested in attending that event, we have a limited amount of seats and they will sell out fast, so we would love to get you guys signed up for that. You can sign up on our website, or if you go on LinkedIn, you can sign up on there. All right, so I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our moderator of the panel, and she's going to kick us off with the actual panel. So Jessica, over here. Jessica is a brand manager of program development in Paramount Healthcare. Jessica helps create and maintain patient dining programs which enhance the patient dining experience and are implemented in over 240 healthcare accounts nationally according to current trends, regulatory standards, and industry demand. One such program Jessica helped bring to fruition was the Aramark Healthcare Patient Dining Emergency Preparedness Policy and corresponding planning workbook. Both given regulatory-based practical guidelines for emergency planning to healthcare food service leaders. Prior to her current role, she served a number of positions directly in the acute care setting, including clinical dietitian, food service director, and system patient experience director. These opportunities shaped her as a servant leader and installed the passion of educating others as a way to facilitate empowerment and growth. She earned her BS in Nutritional Sciences from the Pennsylvania State University and afterwards continued to Cornell University where she completed her dietetic internship. She previously served on the Pennsylvania Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Board as a public policy chair, which developed her leadership and advocacy skills. Jessica lives with her family in Pennsylvania. She loves food, especially dark chocolate, me too, and creating memories with those she loves most. So Jessica, welcome. She's going to be moderating and introducing the rest of the panel. Thank you so much for being here. This topic, but I love that Jessica's moderating this topic, is that a lot of times people ask us about leadership roles in healthcare, and I love to see that there's a variety of different leadership roles in healthcare. So it's not just, operational, VPs or so forth, but there's a variety of roles, and I always appreciate people in roles like Jessica's, or other roles in the hospital that are so important to how the hospital runs, and really kind of make the patient experience and make, what the roles that, we do in a hospital happen. And these roles are ones that often don't get highlighted, but are really important roles. So I'm so glad that you agreed to do this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Warm welcome, and I do love dark chocolate. Fun fact about me is that when I travel, I will take my Dove Darks with me so I can have them with my coffee in the morning, so highly recommend. And I am glad to be here today, and the topic is very of interest to me, and we have a fabulous panel that I will briefly introduce, and then after I introduce the whole panel, we'll also just take a moment. I'll just ask each of you to also just take a moment to introduce yourself and provide us with some information about what you do, and perhaps even a fun fact about yourself, if you so desire. Okay, so I can caught you off guard with that. I won't do other off-guard questions. Okay. So on our panel today, we have Natasha. And this is Natasha Stroken, who's from Memorial Healthcare System and serves as the Corporate Director of Emergency Management. And then next we have Jose Lopez, the Director of Environmental Health, Safety, and Emergency Preparedness at Baptist Health. And then next we have Eric, here from the Broward Health System, who serves as the System Director of Emergency Management. And then last but not least, we have John Freeland from Florida Power and Light, and he serves as the Director of Emergency Preparedness. So welcome. A lot of experience here on the panel. Again, we're happy to have them with us today. So just have them give a brief introduction of themselves, and again, just if you feel so inclined, a brief little fun fact.
I guess I'll start. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is my first time at one of these events, so it's great to see just a mix of different partners that are in the room. So, as Jessica said, my name is Natasha Strokin. I am with Memorial Healthcare System as the Corporate Director of Emergency Management. And really what that means is I oversee for our 6 hospitals and our various off-sites and offices the emergency management process, from planning all the way through to exercising and mitigation. I've been with the system for about 4.5 years. Maybe that's the fun fact, is I got there in November of 2019. I had 2 months to start figuring out kind of where the cafeteria and the bathroom was, and then, you know, the world kind of ended. And for the next 3 years, it was just all COVID all the time. So it was a great introduction to the healthcare side, having spent my first 12 years doing this in public health. So I'm, again, really happy to be here. I look forward to the questions and to work with the rest of the panel.
Good evening, I'm Jose Lopez. I work with Baptist Health. I'm the corporate director, assistant director of emergency preparedness for all 11 hospitals and throughout the system, from Palm Beach all down to the Keys. I guess fun fact of myself, right, is I got my start about 10 or so years ago. Working for Natasha back at the Florida Department of Health.
It's a small world.
It's a very small world, as you mentioned. And you know, some of the functions in this role extend beyond just emergencies, looking how the daily operations work. Except when an emergency happens, it almost feels like a daily operation business.
Hi everyone, my name is Eric Pena. I am the Director of Emergency Management for Broward Health. Much like Natasha, I got my start here, I got my start here after 2020, so I was baptized by fire, as they say. And after COVID started, I'm the Director of Emergency Management for the entire system, here at Broward Health, all of our hospital systems here as well. And before then, I did a little bit different stuff. My background is a bit different, with fire rescue and PD as well. And welcome all of you to our beautiful Broward Health North facility.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Freeland, Director of Emergency Preparedness at Florida Power and Light. I've been with them since February of last year, so a little bit of a short stint, but spent 18 years in distribution operations on the natural gas side of the business. Fun fact, I guess we'll talk about what FPL Emergency Preparedness does first. So really it's an all hazards approach. Obviously being storm prepared in Florida is extremely important, especially on the electric side. And so we, in the emergency preparedness space, prepare for all things, including storm, but not exclusive to that. So it's cybersecurity awareness, it's physical threat for our substation and other facilities, obviously capacity shortfall, generation, things like that, that we get involved with, and now wildfires becoming something that we're dabbling in as well from an emergency preparedness perspective. Fun fact about me, I raise my own meat chickens on an annualized basis. So if you're interested in learning about that, I'm really happy to talk to you about it after.
Anyways, thank you so much. So without further ado, I guess we can go ahead and get started. And actually, you had a nice segue. You mentioned the term all hazards approach. And as many of us are aware, CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, there is a condition of participation that relates to emergency preparedness. And that term is referenced in there as well. And so I was wondering if the panel could look this up. Tasha, maybe you could start. Of course, anyone can chime in then. Just describing what are our local emergency risks. If we need to be considering all hazards, obviously hurricanes come to top of mind in this area, but please elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure, so our risks are, well, they're very varied here in South Florida. We have natural hazards, man-made, technological, and hazmat are kind of the categories that we assess every year. And the greatest risks, it really depends on what has happened, what our preparedness levels are, and really how advanced we are in terms of having resources. So usually hurricanes, absolutely, it is one of the top risks. It's probably our most likely hazard, but what we're also finding is that severe weather is climbing the ranks. Because a hurricane, a named storm, you know it's coming, you see it's coming, you have time to prepare. But when we start seeing those no-name storms, the ones that would have been tropical if they had just formed in the right part of the water, that ends up with an April 12th, that ends up with June, where we are underwater, where we have major health implications and really just transportation implications. Tornadoes were never really a thing. I mean, we knew that there were tornadoes as part of a hurricane. And now we see that that's a risk because we get along with that bad storm and then heat injuries, or the heat index now that we've had. Whereas in the past it was, well, it's really hot, people who are vulnerable will have increased illness. Now we're finding it's really hot, our server rooms are being impacted because our building systems can't keep up. So when we're looking at what we do is, at least every year, we're doing a hazard vulnerability assessment. We're looking at all of the potential hazards, from hurricanes to floods to wildfires that were mentioned. We look at hazardous material events. We look at technological issues when we look at cyber events, or even just your bad luck failure because a squirrel got into a switch station somewhere. So we look at everything that could happen. We assess how bad is bad. So what would happen if this were to occur, and then we assess how ready are we to deal with it. So every year we'll do that with all hazards to understand what our risks are and where we should focus, but because we can't focus on everything all the time, we also look at our baseline. Do we know how to do incident command? Do we have plans? Do we know how to get resources? Do we know how to communicate? And regardless of why we're doing all of those things, we're doing that as an all hazards, because regardless of if we're activating because of a storm or because of a plane crash, the people who are at the table know these are my responsibilities regardless, and the nuance is just what's the particular catastrophe that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and some of the things mentioned there, and I agree with that, you know, a lot of it is also an identification process, right? And some of the things that are important to look at is after, you know, we identify those to potentially be a concern, is, you know, essentially what do we do about them, right? And a lot of times, you know, it's whether it be a policy or a plan or things like that, those are good, and it's not that we need those. But a lot of times those maybe sit on the shelf or in some SharePoint somewhere. So where you get a lot of that meat on your HVA, right, in the hazard analysis, to say, okay, well, when we've done this before, when we've tested this in an exercise or, you know, or an event or, you know, whatnot, we've seen these things occur, and this is how we prepare for those things, right? So a lot of times, you know, my background from before was a lot of actually in IT prior to everything we were going to talk about. And you know, a lot of times you look at, you know, IT is very important to everything that you do, right? But there are certain redundancies that we might overlook, right? There are certain things that we might consider is a good place because we have maybe some redundancies, so we think, but then, you know, you have one internet service provider, or you might have just one area where it comes to, right? And I can tell you some places with construction, you know, they'll cut that one cable, right? Unfortunately, so. You know, how can you maybe leverage, whether it be, you know, sharing within sites themselves or using a SIM card, just for certain situations to do those things beyond those other things.
Yeah, can't say that any better. And my theory, just to reflect off of Natasha and others, is the way you overcome that is having fundamentals. If you have the fundamentals in place on how to respond to any type of disaster, all hazards approach. Is if you have that in place, you can adapt that and overcome it. Whatever new disaster or threat that may come to your system, you're able to respond to it, understanding your fundamentals like HICS, for example, and so forth. And it's interesting because when you adopt that theory, you're able to still be able to respond to it and make sure you ensure the safety of everybody in your system. And another thing too is my background is I come from fire rescue, PD, and so forth. So when you take those elements into account, you have to think of things like MCIs, mass casualties, and so forth. And those are things that, to me, it's always an oncoming threat in our community where you don't really think about it, you don't really approach, you don't really think about it. But in our current atmosphere right now, not only just cyber and so forth. It's also a hurricane, which is a huge threat. It's also political environment and so forth, which people kind of put in the back burner, but you always have to be able to put that in your foresight to be able to prepare for that. So when it comes to all hazards, it's always being able to think outside the box as well, not just thinking about your normal hazards that we always assume in HVA. And HVA, again, is your fundamental. When you address your HVA, it's the fundamental emergency management and disaster preparedness. It's always thinking outside the box.
Well, everything that you guys have already said, I think is super important. The other thing is, we follow the ICS structure, so it's the incident command structure, and everybody at FPL has a storm role. You think about from a critical function exercise, they have their blue sky role and storm role, and it could be two totally different things. And so, in order to exercise your plans and go through that hazard analysis, what we found to be extremely successful is to perform annualized drills. They could be company-wide drills. For instance, our cybersecurity drill is a company-wide drill, affects all aspects of the company, whereas a storm drill on an annualized basis may only interact with certain departments or business units within the organization. So I think it's one, understanding, folks understanding what to do in that, whatever that environment is, that threat environment, and then also exercising through those plans so you can do a after action or lessons learned and know where you've got potential gaps and going through a realistic exercise.
I think it's interesting, I think all of you mentioned just like the fact that there are things that happen, but then there's crossover, right? Implications that one thing happens maybe because of a hurricane, perhaps you lose power, but maybe if power comes out, as you mentioned as well, because someone strikes the line. Ironically, I was vacationing one year in the Outer Banks, and that exact same thing happened as they were doing construction and constructing a new bridge, and the power went out, and so it's interesting. So it can happen at any time, as you mentioned. It doesn't necessarily have to be isolated to a specific event for a certain kind of implication to occur. So what do we face in terms of challenges as we prepare for those emergencies? You have the mic.
It's on hold the mic. Yeah. I think you covered some of those a little bit in the sense of, it's a lot, right? There, if you look at an HVA, as Eric mentioned, just as a fundamental, there's 40, 50 different items, right? And kind of to address this, how we go to that all hazards approach. Okay, well, what would we do if every single one of those things happen? How do we kind of cookie cutter, that, and see how we can make sure that we can address those things. But I think some of the challenges are it's a lot of different things, right? Some of the challenges at times, I'm not saying it's all the time or even necessarily in my case, but I can tell you overall, some of the challenges are the awareness of it. Right, okay, well, this, as Eric mentioned, this might fall low on the realm, but the risks involved are pretty high, right? So maybe we should do, as we mentioned, that we should do an exercise for that incident, even though it might not be as common or as expected to be common, right? So, for example, a hurricane, knock on wood, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens, right? So we prepare for that. But the flood in Broward last year, right, that knocked out fuel for some time, right? That unfortunately is happening more and more. So so knowing what's going to happen is kind of a challenge. Just preparing overall on that all hazards is a big one of the big challenges.
I think to pick up on that a little bit, so the situational awareness piece is huge, and it's also a big challenge that, the stuff is scary. You don't necessarily want to think that you are going to be that target for a terrorist event, that you're going to go to a sporting event and have something happen and break out, that you're at the beach, you're at a movie theater. So some of that challenge is we don't want to think about it. But what our role is to think about it, to look ahead and say that things that aren't traditionally what we would think to be our responsibility would become our responsibility very quickly. So when we look at events and looking really Miami-Dade and Broward especially, we have the Hard Rock right in the middle. And the Hard Rock, we have the F1 with a lot of fuel and a lot of cars going really fast. We have soccer, which we'll leave that one alone just for now. 2026 is going to be pretty good, and the air vents are clean now because they got cleaned out. So we look at those events that are coming out this hard. And we think, what could happen? F1, great event. What happens if something happens to the tournament? And because one of the cars had an accident. We look at soccer, we look at Rolling Loud, we look at Ultra, we look at these events to say that these are things that bring people to South Florida, but what does that mean for us? What are the risks? And I think all of us most likely look at every event and think, wow, this is a mass casualty waiting to happen. We're fun at parties, let me tell you. Because if you give us an event, we're going to tell you what can go wrong. But that's really the challenge, is getting everyone else to understand that we are happy to be paranoid for you, but we want you to understand that these are the risks, and when we're coming to you, when we're going to our leadership, and we've been very lucky to have leadership that supports, to say that these things could happen, and maintaining the awareness and being willing to prepare for them is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, because no one wants to think of these things. We want to make sure that if it does happen, we're going to make you're comfortable responding, and you know what you have and you know what you need.
Yeah, just to echo exactly what Natasha was saying, it's the situations that happen that you're not expecting. And for instance, like what happened with the Panthers parade as well, it's getting your leadership and organization all on one plan and updating them constantly before these large events, so that you're not caught blindsided. And that's usually the biggest issue, is being able to prepare for these instances that you're not, that are outside of the regular thinking. Those are the big challenges in emergency management planning, is the instances that you're that you can't really plan for. For example, the mass casualty incident that we just did at Deerfield. That could happen at any time, at any place, and it could be an event where, like I just mentioned, the Florida Panthers parade, or it could be an event that happens ultra, just like Natasha was saying. So it's that challenge. It's that challenge where getting your partners together as well, your community stakeholder partners, is a huge challenge as well. Because when you get them on the same plane, you get them on the same page, to be able to respond as well is also a large challenge. Because if everyone's on the same page, then they're able to understand that there could be an MCI. What are the threat hazards? How high of a risk threat is this? How many people are attending this event? What protection and security is there? What redundancy do we have? And when you don't have that, that's when situations occur.
Yeah, I agree. And just to give it a little different spin, I think sometimes the biggest challenge is to work across the lines, even within your own organization, to get everybody on Natasha's level in the company, kind of thinking about what could go wrong. And I think the mindset and being able to deliver kind of the emergency preparedness mindset in a captivating way that allows for the business units to kind of take hold and recognize that there's opportunities outside of storm, for instance, because I think a lot of people can get focused specifically in Florida on that. And honestly, the benefit of storm is we know it's coming. Typically, we have time to prepare. A cyber event, we don't. So you think about the different aspects of what kind of cross-functionally emergency preparedness kind of has to think through. Honestly, it's making sure everybody has their plan and knows their plan and takes it as seriously as the professionals that think about it all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love how you stated there about there's oftentimes, well, maybe not oftentimes, but there's definitely are times where maybe you may have a warning that something's coming,
Sure.
but other times you don't. But maybe something on a smaller scale has been experienced, right, that you can apply as a learning and scale up to a different type of scenario. So, I think both of you towards the end here mentioned about, community involvement, and you mentioned about crossing lines, not only within your own organization, right, but expanding right? And I'm wondering, John, maybe to start us off, can you expand upon that community involvement and not just crossing lines within your own organization, silos within your own organization, but even beyond?
Sure. So at FPL, we do annually, we reach out to all of the emergency operations centers during an event. If an emergency operations center is activated, we have physically in that facility an FPL representative the entirety of that activation. What that does, obviously, it strengthens the partnership. So it's not just a name via email. It's a face that someone's familiar with dealing with. And honestly, it creates kind of that networking structure where you're not afraid to ask questions, you're not afraid to approach and think through things from that perspective. So from a strategic kind of partnership, you think about emergency operations centers, we liaise with police, fire all across the state. It's county officials, public officials, the Florida Public Service Commission. It's engaging the folks that ultimately, from a partnership perspective, you think about it from the hospital side of things and the critical infrastructure partners. We have customer advisors dedicated to strategic industries across our footprint that allow for that collaboration and ultimately get that engagement and the messaging out there. So it's not just us in a silo. We're getting the message out and collaborating with others throughout the community.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it on the head. The EOCs is another, just like we were talking about, the EOCs is another fundamental portion of emergency management and having representatives there across all types of critical infrastructure. And silos is also a big portion too in healthcare. Healthcare is always sometimes being pushed aside for some odd reason when it comes to these types of large disasters, or planning for these disasters when they do occur. And healthcare is a critical infrastructure, just like power and light and so forth, and all the other critical infrastructures that any municipality or county holds. So another challenge too is being able to convince that we're able to that is part of what makes a community safe and ensures the safety of everybody in the community. And it's a culture that needs to be changed, I think, throughout the country, and it is being changed. And we've seen the benefits of it when we do involve ourselves in these pre-planning stages to make sure that we are there present in planning and making sure our hospital systems are ready. Without that element, there is a huge opportunity for when something does go wrong, that we are not prepared, that we don't have the upstaffing, that we don't have the contingency plans ready. And the other challenge for that too as well is when we work in partnership with our leadership, like we're saying, and stressing that importance that we are here as a liaison and communicating that. So, and operationally wise, them taking that back to our independent centers and hospitals and being able to analyze that. But EOCs are huge when it comes to that. So we were in part of the EOCs for what portion was it? The event for the parade. We were there present as Broward Health, and it was a huge benefit.
And talking about collaboration, and some of the challenges. So hospitals, in general terms, right, are essentially, or healthcare in general, right, not just the hospital, are typically referred to as first receivers, right, and that's where sometimes that gap falls, where the first responders, right, as police and fire, they're like, okay, well, we're responding, so maybe we leave behind, and well, we're part of that response, right, because when you respond and bring people to a place like ours, we're receiving those people who need to be able to handle that. So I think overall in South Florida, we're seeing a lot of changes, a lot of relationships, and we can see them ourselves, but even throughout, where we are getting into those rooms that Eric was referring to, and a lot of that, at least in our case, I know, Natasha, I don't want to be clear, but even there is the coalitions. Every county has one. Actually started nationally in Palm Beach. But there's a county, in our case, coalition for healthcare preparedness, right? I serve on a board for Miami-Dade County, and we have team members in the boards for the other counties that we represent. And that's beneficial because not only are all the hospitals or ALFs, long-term care, the different types of healthcare providers in those groups or individuals, but so are fire rescue, police, and all the other folks that will help in any sort of disaster without the community. So when it looks at, even the EOCs, right, the emergency management for those counties. So when we get together, we're able to exercise a lot of those things and collaborate and say, okay, well, how are we going to respond to X, right? Whether it be a patient surge, or whether it be some sort of a coordinated attack of some sort, or whether it be even utility outage of water throughout the county. So those things, are great, and that's how you truly are able to test the resiliency of not just maybe the organization, but beyond just the organization's walls.
I'm glad you brought up the coalitions, because that is something that it's a huge benefit. As Jose said, in South Florida, we have 4 coalitions that work independently for the needs of their community, for their counties. What we also have here, we're very lucky, is a very strong regional domestic security task force, which covers the entire region, where all the coalitions come together, and we then also have additional partners from the state, from FDLE, and every opportunity that we have as healthcare to walk into that room and say, we're here. Because we see still that there is, as I said, the first responders is there in the field and they're doing things and they're catching bad guys and transporting them. And then there's a major push that emergency management is looking at family reunification centers. But we're in the middle. So every time we have an opportunity, we are going to go out in the community and say, hey, remember us. It used to be, when I started 16 years ago doing this, is I would walk into an EOC as a public health person, and they would say, is it time for vaccines? Like, why are you here? No, I'm here for the hurricane. I'm here for the response. And now it's, oh, where's public health? Where's healthcare? They have the seat for us. But we have to continue doing that. We have to be at the table, because the collaboration is really where in an emergency is going to help us. All year long, we are competitors. And between hospital to hospital, even sometimes among us is where, So we are wanting to be the best, and we're doing a lot of things, and we're getting the resources. But when it comes down to it, because we know each other, through the coalitions, through the Regional Domestic Security Task Force, if one of us gets in trouble, we know we can pick up the phone, and somebody else is going to give us that pump or the cooler or whatever it is that we need. Because we all know that if one of us goes down, we're all going down. If one hospital is not able to receive, that means everybody else is going to have that additional burden. So having that community, even amongst ourselves, is, I know I can call Eric, I know I can call Jose, I know I can call Raj Mount Sinai. We can say, we need this thing, do you have it? And invariably it's going to be, where do you need to do it?
I love that, I think about, there's terms of saying first receivers versus first responders. And the fact that these coalitions put these key stakeholders in the same room is just, I don't want to say mind-blowing, but it really does, I think, break down those barriers. And because at the end of the day, we really are here to serve our communities, right? The patients and the people that are in our communities, and that's exactly what you just described. And to be able to know somebody ahead of time, and to have that relationship, I think is just key in having our success, or one of the keys in having our success. So, is there anything else that you would say from, from our healthcare organization and our community members that you think that we could do to prepare, either further to, bridge these relationships, or anything else you would, add to that?
So I'll start.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that we do a pretty good job with outreach and education, but I think we can always do better. We see that they're pushed, for example, for kind of Stop the Bleed, or the active bystander, and the different types of classes. So when we're looking at the general community, I think that it's repetition, particularly when nothing happens for a while, because we have very, very short memories. which is why Home Depot, a couple days before the storm, is insane. Because we forget when was the last storm. If we don't see it immediately, do I really know someone who's going to need a tourniquet? Do I really know someone who's going to need an AED or CPR? And I think being able to do that outreach and just being more in the community, and I know that we do, all of us on the panel, many of you I'm sure as well, but it's that repetition of saying you're part of this with us. The more prepared the community is, the easier it's going to be for all of us to have the resources for the people who really need it. So doing education on special needs registries, having people have their plans in advance when something is going to happen, because even if that person on the registry never goes to a shelter, we know that they have a plan, and they've thought about it, and they're ready to do something. And I think that's always an opportunity to get the community involved, to really help us help them, and really hold resources for the most vulnerable.
And as you're talking about that, it reminded me, kind of, I don't think anyone likes the kick in the can, right? Where you call someplace and you gotta talk to this person, you gotta talk to that person, you gotta talk to that. So a lot of times, I know we find all of ourselves, other than that, we find ourselves in situations where maybe it's not even in our realm, right? But it's just the right things that, there's a one-stop shop. I'll receive the request. I'll help you out, whatever you need for, especially shelter registering. That's a county function. But it behooves everyone in the community for us to be able to, let me send you the link. It doesn't cost me anything, right? So, providing information is available, and to that point as well, a lot of times when we look back to the HBAs and we say, okay, we're prepared because of X thing, and that now lowers the risk, right? So as it lowers the risk, it lowers the priority. And over time, as it lowers the priority, then that might have, whether it be reduced funding towards it or reduced interest towards it, but those functions needed to occur to keep it there. So as Natasha was mentioning, as things go on and time goes on, and we forget about why we did those things, it's well, if we were to abandon those functions, that risk then comes right back up. Right? So sometimes, you do have to, reassess always, every couple of years go and make sure you're doing the right thing for the right reason. But at the same time, recognize that those functions are potentially keeping those things down, and that, so even if it's not needed per se at that time, the actions doing them when they're not needed is ideal compared to when you need it, right? Because then you just won't have time to deal with it.
Absolutely. That's number one good. And Natasha nailed it on the head with kicking, or you did with kicking the can. And how you better prepare for that is by understanding that we're not in silos. And like for example, COVID, we all came together during COVID, and that wasn't planned in the sense of the way you prepare for something like that is having pre-established agreements, pre-established ways that you're able to, let's say, during discharge for special needs patients with the counties, with hospitals, finding out how they get their transportation and so forth. And without that, you can't really pre-plan effectively. So the pre-planning issue is huge when it comes to large disasters. And everything that Natasha hit on, and knows as well, without those things put in place prior to a disaster, you're standing alone. You're standing with patients that don't know where to go home because their home has been disaster, their home has been broken. They can't get home. So that's one huge element when it comes to how we better prepare for large disasters. Is having those pre-established rules, pre-established communications, pre-established contracts, MOUs for inter-facility transports, let's say, when one hospital can't accept patients or needs to evacuate patients. We kind of did that on the fly. And there's a lot to say about that, which is great because we all came together as a large healthcare community across the state. But that's one element that I saw that could be better addressed. And,
yeah, I'll close with, we found it very beneficial to benchmark across multiple agencies, like, if it's healthcare specifically, maybe reach out to someone who's gone through something that you may not have experienced to get some lessons learned or opportunities to think differently about maybe their experience, it really allows to kind of reduce complacency in some of the things that may not have popped up, you may not have had to react to, where you can quickly kind of get a master's class lesson literally within an hour or two, just picking the brain of someone who's gone through those experiences. So that's definitely a best practice that we follow.
That's a great point. And I think all of it's, you're hearing again and again, I feel like this word plan. And it just made me think about, my one son is in Scouts, and last night at Scout camp, I heard the word preparedness. And where would you go if there was a fire? One of their things that they talk about, even at home, is we have to come up with a plan if something were to happen at the home. You know, where would you go? And it just makes me think that, as you mentioned, it's around us, and we need to have our personal plans, we need to have our, obviously workplace plans, and then our greater community plans. And the other thing that you kind of mentioned as well is, and it's come up, is related to this exercise and community involvement, is practice. And this is something that holds true to my heart, and so I did prepare a little bit of a poll, just maybe you could elaborate then on the importance of practicing, right? And so this quote, there's two actually, one's from Will Smith. And he says, "I've always considered myself to be just average talent, but what I have is a ridiculous, insane obsessiveness for practice and preparation." So I just think that that's interesting, because it can, maybe you can just elaborate on the importance of practice and the importance of muscle memory, right? People, and I won't go any further, I'll just allow you to elaborate a little bit and maybe even dip into some of that exercise that you did complete last night, or anything else you'd like to add about practicing.
So I'll go quickly, touch on it a little bit at the beginning. Our annualized drill, from a storm perspective, we talked about the blue sky, dark sky, or storm roll. I think it's super important. Now more than ever, I feel like there's turnover in positions and people, there's a fluctuation in the workforce, and you've got kind of changing of generations moving in and out of the industry, and so you're losing a lot of institutional knowledge with some of that churn, and a lot of times what you think we know because we've done it leaves without your knowledge, and so if somebody's not there to push the button and you anticipate that button to be pushed, and that's not in your plan because it's always been done by that person who's been there, it's easy to get complacent in that. And so I think from the practice side of things, is coming up with thoughtful exercises that really test your organization, not just a run-of-the-mill, let's run through the motion because we've done it and we think we're good. It's really how do we exercise and potentially put multiple threats or hazards together in how we practice, because we might be really good at one thing, but adding one additional element to that may create the opportunity for us to completely lose that sense of accomplishment, or that we really feel that we're prepared for something. So just an opportunity, I think, to always think through how can you properly test your whatever it is, audience, organization, business unit, company, in the capacities that really pull those plans out and make people exercise them, because every year it's a new person typically in a role that's going to do something for the first time, and so really important in what we found to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership roles are always changing, and that's a huge challenge that we all experience. I think I can speak for everybody here, and practicing is paramount for that. And when you think about it, you say, okay, that's practice, but you have to practice with thought. You have to practice with attention. Practicing just to practice doesn't really do anything. And at the same time, large-scale practices like what we did at yesterday, for example, the full-scale exercise we did, those are great, but those are one-time exercises that, yes, they do test the system, yes, they do test your operations plans, they do help you go back to see how you fix your exercise plans, your emergency operation plans, and so forth. But really where practice comes in is in the small, micro, continuous sessions. I think that's where it's most beneficial, because that's muscle memory. Without muscle memory and small, micro drills, let's say for instances, you do small active shooter drills throughout your hospital, you do small stand-ups, whatever type of drill that you're doing, a code tech or whatnot in your hospital. So, and it's difficult to do that, but it's paramount when it comes to making sure that all the staff know what to do and so forth.
So, it comes to mind a few things. Right? I think Bruce Lee had a quote where you have, there's better to do it one punch 1,000 times versus 1,000 punches one time, right? So it's no different, right? It's doing the repetitions so you have that muscle memory. But also at the same time, as you're doing those things, I mentioned before, adding different elements, adding different things, because I can tell you, for anyone that's ever planned going to Disney or a wedding or whatever it might be, no matter what plan you have, no matter how many times you've gone before, something will always change, right? Whether the ride breaks down, or whether it rains, or whatever it might be, right? So what's good about planning, what's good about doing those exercises, different ways of how this could work or how it could not work. So when that event happens and it doesn't go the way maybe you planned for, or maybe the way you exercised in the past for, you already know how to navigate those waters because you've done different things or had those thought processes before. So those are some of the things that I think that
And I agree with all of it. It's the plan, and as you mentioned, we say plan a lot. So the plan is great. It's a reference. Sometimes it's just that dusty thing on the shelf. The value of it's not the plan. What's on paper is all fine and good, but it's the planning process. It's sitting down and getting the subject matter experts, but also the people who have to do the work. So when we do something like we did yesterday and we are testing patient decontamination, it's not to say that we have something on paper that has this beautiful diagrams and step-by-step. It's having the people who have to do it actually do it and do it repetitively, because they're the ones who are going to come back and say, yeah, that's not going to work. Or you think we can be in a suit for 30 minutes and it's 98 degrees, it's 20 minutes. Or if we can move this bin of forms from over here to over there, it's going to make it easier. So having that repetition and then having as much as possible the leadership to support it, but also the people who have to do it, that is where we're going to improve, and that's where we're going to be able to kind of close those gaps little by little. But you have to do it all the time. It's all year round. It's not waiting for hurricane season and suddenly realizing that it's May 15th, like, that's not the plan. It's all year round saying, exactly what Eric was saying, is going to the different units, going to your different offsites, and just really sitting down and saying, if this thing were to happen, then we can do that documentation piece and have the plan, but it's really the discussions in between that are going to get us where we need to go.
Sure, I mean, if you think of all the things, right, that happen sometimes on a daily, weekly, even monthly basis, an EMR does go down for what have you reason, right, or some food service, the dish machine goes down, right, like, if that happens, well, great, that happened today, how can I learn for that, because that's a potential implication, right, that could happen from something later down the road. And so it just emphasizes that continuous learning, that you mentioned. So I think it's, I'm glad that you touched upon it, and I just will also just add that I also appreciate, I think you mentioned earlier, Eric, just about PICS, right? And within, again, as a dietitian, food service background, just also want to just stress the importance, and glad that you mentioned it, because within that, there are different hats, right, that people can wear, and just encouraging that all departments get involved in that planning process. I put on the white suits, been involved in the planning and the testing of programs. As a sidebar, those suits, not used anymore, make great outfits for painting. It can be a good bunny suit and you're painting your house. But I really appreciated it. I felt like I learned a lot being involved in a different department that's not necessarily nursing or surgical services, but just appreciate the ask and the invitation to participate in events from leaders such as yourselves. So thank you for that. So COVID has come up, as it usually does in this day and age. Maybe Eric, you can open us up just in terms of any kind of, I haven't gotten my first yet. Learnings from COVID, and I'm sure everyone will have a perspective on it, right? But learnings from COVID and impact on the healthcare organization, and whether it's healthcare or our communities.
So that's a heavy question.
I know, in a nutshell.
That's a big one. I think we're talking about.
In terms of emergency preparedness, maybe
Right.
one or two key takeaways.
One or two key takeaways from COVID was, I stated it earlier, it's how we all came together as a unified healthcare system. That was a huge eye-opening event in our community, in our space, and where we work. And another thing too that was a huge takeaway was it's really hard to predict the future. So you always have to try to plan for the unknown. I know it's hard to plan for the unknown, that's kind of stating a broad statement there. But COVID really taught us that you can't just go down your typical HBAs, as we were stating earlier, where, oh, okay, hurricane's number one, and you know what, pandemic falls at the end of this. You have to be persistent in making sure that you're able to still have your emergency operations plans and still address everything on that list. Even though it has a low score, how much pharmacy do we have on deck? How much blood bank do we have on deck? Without that, you will be caught unknown. And COVID, I think, kind of, in my opinion, brought that to light. And it's just, that was one of the big key takeaways, I think, from COVID. I think it was remarkable how everyone came together and was able to address that.
The world changing basically overnight didn't really give us time to think through. We did have a pandemic plan, emergency plan. It was not nearly as long as it is now. And so I think that, again, it's kind of what Eric said, it's you can think you have the best laid plan out, but you're going to have to think through what's going to surprise you next. One of the things that we learned very quickly was we didn't have enough bandwidth to support the number of employees we had working remotely. And it was like systematically shutting down our access to the network. So think about that, kind of what I mentioned earlier is, how do you test multiple hazards or multiple, potential emergencies hitting you at the same time? It wasn't necessarily a cyber event, but it was a pandemic we were under with a cyber, implication as a result. So it really, I think, opened our eyes to the opportunity that even if you think that your plans are done, or you think that you've exercised it all, there's probably something out there that can be thrown in. And I think, honestly, COVID was terrible, and I don't think there was a positive experience, but you try to take from everything and use those lessons learned to kind of build strength in your processes moving forward, and that's what we've tried to do.
So some of those things, to look at is, previously in the Department of Health, I remember at one point, writing, you've written them too, the pandemic plans for the county or for the state and whatnot, and preparing for those things. I remember also going on multiple trips in a 16-foot box truck to throw away expired PPE, right? And at the time thinking that was a great idea, right? This is obviously all before COVID, when it was like a necessity. And I know times have changed. But a lot of those things in those plans that we wrote was, we had done H1N1, we had done other things, and PPE wasn't a problem, right? Until it was, right? And that's usually how things work, right? It's not a problem until it is. And then looking at, kind of who those relationships that we talked about before with the vendors and how those relationships are built, right? And how, and what are the contingencies when potentially a vendor promises you and you and you and you and everybody else the same supplies, and then all that gets commandeered by somebody else. So it's finding ways to be additionally resilient, right? Also trying to find, for lack of a better term, like an innovative way of doing things. Eric mentioned earlier, thinking outside that box. Like, what can we do now? Not accepting where we are right now. What other alternatives do we have, right? And I know at times there was like clean PPE, or there was using expired PPE, or there was other other things to do, or the reusable gowns and things like that, which, as you mentioned, we'll never use again, right? Until we do, right? Until we need to. So those are things that I think lessons learned from COVID is to be cognizant of, be prepared for those unexpected, right? Because I know I mentioned before that person's always presses the button, right? And that's just what their job has been for the last 30 years. They retired, and now they have to press the button, so who's going to do that?
So I think we're trying to have a couple of positive spins on COVID. Just because, as I said, everything we do, every response, every exercise, there's something that we learn, there's something that we get better. And I think one is that we learn to be very, very creative. There's some of our staff here, and everyone did it, is we had a cafeteria that is now a patient care area. We had external everything. We could treat you, we could do fast track, we could do everything outside. We could change the entire negative to positive air pressure on a whim. And we absolutely got creative of understanding of building an apparatus, whether you had to make your own face masks, or all the way through to saying that we have an education structure put together. So if something is different, and I have PTSD about urine collection cups, which was something like you figure that's common, that's everything, but we had an apparatus that whenever something changed, that we were able to be very nimble and say, you're used to using this product, well, we're going to use another product slightly different, but we were able to incorporate them. And within a day, turning around and saying, okay, we're going to use this now, and turning it around and doing it safely. So I think it really stretched everyone to understand we can do a lot. And it was kind of surprising sometimes how much we were able to do because it was necessary. And we were able to maintain patient safety. We were able to do all of these things in a really hard situation. But we need to hold on to that now and realize that we still need to be as innovative. We still, just because now everything is available, remember when it wasn't. And remember what we had to do to not necessarily be so rigid and understand that in a heartbeat, it could change. So don't forget those lessons to know that it is absolutely possible to do it. The other thing is from an emergency management perspective, I think COVID was a little bit helpful because people understood by the end of those 3 years what emergency management did. We weren't there to do whatever it is that maybe they thought we were doing until a hurricane came. Is we became an integral part. We were able to really bring more people in and do more training, and now we have so many more people who understand the HICS, who understand how we can pivot to do something new. That was a positive, that in the 3 years of COVID, I don't know that without it we would have been able to advance emergency preparedness in healthcare that quickly. So it wasn't all bad, but it had its moments. Oh, that's right, Zika was, we did do Zika. Zika was fun. So, yeah, so exactly. And we were able to pivot. Because if you ever thought in your career that you would spend days and days knocking on people's doors asking them for urine samples, until you've done that, you haven't lived.
What is it, like, things just come to mind as you're all talking, right? Bringing it all together. We talk about who's the same person who's pressing the button. And then we think about Zika, and then we think about who was part of that, who wasn't part of that, who was ready and who wasn't, who knew what to do, who didn't know what to do when it came to the next thing. And so it just ties into, just everything, overlaps in what you're saying. And, John, you brought it up about just the impact of COVID even in terms of a different, entity, right? And people often think about the healthcare impact, but there's obviously other community impacts in terms of thinking too about this preparedness. And so I just love that element that you brought to that discussion, so thank you. And again, you talked about plans, and it's one of the conditions of, one of the elements from CMS. You have to have a plan, you have to have policies and procedures, right? You have communication, and you have to test. We kind of talked about all of that. Anything else you want to elaborate on in terms of, practically speaking, as organizations, things that we would want to consider in that planning process?
So I think when you're looking at the overall spectrum, the one thing that we are getting better at, but I think we spend a lot of time on preparedness, so planning and response because something is happening. Both recovery and mitigation, which are the other four phases of emergency management, I think that's an opportunity to look at those things as well. I think a lot of mitigation happened during COVID, a lot of mitigation happens because of hurricanes, but as these new threats are coming in, so as we're looking now at extreme heat threats, at climate change threats, really focusing on that part of the business, I guess, is something that I think we all need to look at, not only from a grant perspective, but really understanding that if you need to do mitigation, it's not going to be something that it's from today or tomorrow. You're looking potentially years-long progress and programs and grants and work that can be very disruptive. So I think that's an opportunity that we have that we need to think a little bit more about, that we're getting ready for that next event.
And, so one of the things, that we've been working on, I can tell you, is a lot of times it's referred to as EM or emergency management. It's even just that brand in itself of really being, it sounds weird to be key, but, emergency preparedness overall, right? Because the management part of emergency management is when the things are happening, but really most of the work where it's at is beforehand, right? And sometimes afterwards. And in that realm, one of the things that I know we're looking at is we do it for so many other things, right? When we look at, whether it be big data, or whether it be, machine learning, or even, we're doing now like AI and things like that, of trying to, we sit down and we'll have a group of people here and we'll say, okay, what do we think is a bad thing that might happen? We could operate HPA that way. We'll sit in the room and kind of ponder as to how maybe we can address those things based off of our experiences or things we've done or research on best practices. But looking at the data around us, right, and saying, okay, what can we predict is going to happen, right? I know you mentioned predicting is very, very difficult. It's not a fun game, but there are things that we can, looking at certain indicators or certain things. Heat is a good example, right? We work with NOAA, right? And say, okay, we're going to get their information, look at the numbers that they have, look at the fluctuations of what they expect, and then how can we then maybe posture ourselves and our needs, right, to be ready for a more heat-related illness, right, and things like that, right? So it's looking at things that we can, to a certain way, get a correlation or not, things that we can start looking at data to start getting into that realm, predicting as best as we can to kind of get ahead of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we're doing here is, I don't know if you guys have heard about the floods that happened, but at least for our system, we're trying to get ahead of that when it comes to the planning process. We've reached out, throughout the county and so forth, and did different ways of planning and making sure that we're able to. So the 100-year flood, they said, was never going to happen again. Now it's continuously happening every couple weeks. The planning portion is extremely difficult and ongoing. But the good thing is that our federal and state assets and programs like Florida VA and so forth, and Grant VA, there's resources out there where we can reach out to and ensure that our hospital system is protected. We have resources out there where we can petition for grants for and make sure that we're able to ensure that. But the planning process is always an ongoing process. We try to predict it, but can't. It's always in cash room at some point. Just exactly what Natasha said is thinking about the next storm that may happen, and it's not just about storms. As we stated earlier.
Yeah, I would just encourage the group to think, as our reliance on technology continues to increase, seems like daily, we're advancing in technology. What should be built in part of planning is what you do without those programs. How would you operate if you didn't have the things that you rely on? And honestly, it can boil down to as simple as your communication, the phone in your pocket. What do you do if the phone in your pocket doesn't work? Where do you go? Where do you rally with your team? How do you get information? So if you're not practicing those things, as part of kind of thinking through the ultimate planning process, it's going to be very difficult. If that emergency were to take place, the loss of communications didn't happen. So I would think through what are your paper processes, as elaborate as your planning work charts and diagrams are. That's great, and I think it's important. It's as important to think about how do we make this happen on paper? How do we make this happen without the technology that's allowed that?
It's funny you mentioned that, because just this evening, one of my coworkers was here, he mentioned he was on a recent flight, and the power cord that he brought had a USB, but he forgot to bring like brick, and so, and his seat only had the brick. He's like, I had to go through a 2-hour flight without my phone, and it was just like thinking about that, but perhaps extended, and how we do communicate, because it is something that we rely on daily, hourly, right, by the minute, in our organizations, personally, as well. Which also makes me think about people, right? So there's a human element to all of this as well, right? And they go into our planning and they really execute all of this, and also are involved in the recovery. I'm so glad you mentioned about recovery as well. It's not just this preparedness, it's not going through it, but it's the afterwards as well. So people will bring us together and help us to be successful. So I think we have about 15 minutes left, and if the group's okay with it, allow us for a few time for questions, and then I'll just allow you each to have your final words to kind of wrap this up, if that works for the group. And we'll just open it up for some questions. Feel free just to raise your hand and ask the question loudly. And you can direct it towards the group or to the individual. Any questions from the group? Oh, good, we got some hands raised. I saw this gentleman's hand go up first. I'll let you go first, and we'll come over to you.
Thank you. So, aside from hurricanes, is there anything that you're really afraid of here in Florida?
You said, aside from hurricanes, is there anything else you're really afraid of here in Florida?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
There's a boogeyman that everyone's kind of afraid of, and I may be able to speak for a lot of people, and you just touched on it too. And it falls into the cyber world right now. The cyber world right now, I think, is, and I think Natasha can speak on it as well. It's something that is out there that not many people are familiar with. It's the boogeyman in the room. I know there's a lot of IT background people that maybe you can speak about this a bit more. It's a new threat right now. Natasha's world too, getting the intel that we're getting from the domestic security task force, terrorism liaison, and so forth. But cybersecurity is also a huge threat right now that we've seen throughout. And there's always information coming down from our state and federal partners about what could be the next threat. So, what are we afraid of? All of it. Another thing too is what we're really afraid of, I think, is like the trifecta. Something that may happen that's multiple disasters happening at the same time. For instance, like kind of what happened in COVID. You had civil unrest, you had a hurricane season, and you had the pandemic. So there's a lot. So I don't know what to do.
Just to add to that a little bit, I actually am an adjunct professor from Remedy College in cybersecurity, and when I'm teaching for a lot of those classes, I'm realizing a lot of times that some of the students sometimes they don't, even though that's the realm they want to go into, they don't even know about cybersecurity in general. What I can essentially say about breaking down many times for those courses is it's no different than the real world, right? It's like, oh, cyber world is no different than what we have here. And essentially the way you secure it is by having that onion approach, right? We have layers upon layers to go through it. Eventually, someone that's persistent enough or someone with enough knowledge will eventually get to the center, right? So it's really how do you address, kind of like you mentioned before, like those hoops, and what do you do about it when it happens, right? It's not to scare anyone that, it's going to happen. You do mitigation, you do things to protect against it, but it's also at sometimes accepting what might eventually happen and being able to identify how those things are going to be addressed, right? In my experience, I actually worked with fine dining way back, and one of my first jobs, one of my first days on work was for Mother's Day weekend, and I was the prep cook, right, and dishwasher during the thing. And the dishwasher, as you mentioned earlier, broke, and it just had a bunch of water coming down, and it would go into a bucket that I would have to carry and throw onto the drain on the other side of the place. So our coup was I would carry it and move it back and forth, no big deal, I'm 16 years old, no problem. My back probably still feels it today. and so those are things when you look at the coops and what you do, recognize you can do that for so long, right? But how long, before you have to break the glass and do something else?
And a question over here, sir.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about drills, right? How do you prepare for that? We all know that everyone does fire drills, we do active shooter drills. How do you guys, being at the top of the totem pole, so to speak, make sure that the people at the bottom of the totem pole actually actively participate and understand what their role is? Because a lot of times for them, it feels like a checkbox activity, right? And that defeats the whole purpose of what you guys try to implement. So how do you create an engagement and make sure that they actually participate?
So it's a lot of repetition, and there's also a lot of collaboration and planning. So most of us will use the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program type structure. It's building from the time that we're planning and we're bringing people together, having them engage from there. It's doing training so that people are comfortable in their roles and doing it repetitively. And sometimes it's showing up at 6 in the morning to get the shift, sometimes it's showing up at 10 o'clock at night to really engage, again, those individuals who have to do the work. But there's also a lot of support that we need from leadership, that support that we need from the department heads, because I think we all realize in the emergency management that this is not what most of you do. This is an added duty as assigned for a lot of people. So it's I think we like to say it's management by influence, of really trying to get people to understand why we want you here. And not always to do the fun stuff. So yesterday was a little bit of the fun stuff. So we put up our tents and we have patients and they have the fake makeup on and they're moulaged and we go through the process. But it's also just getting them to show up when we walk up to their unit and say, if there were a fill in blank, if there were a bomb threat, if there were an infant abduction, if something was happening, what would we do? So it's really just a lot of this counter engagement, honestly, but the support from leadership of saying this is important. We need to do this. And we have to make it engaging. So it's not always going to be all of the fun stuff, but it's also going to be something that people are going to want to do, that they're going to be interested in and want to participate. But it's really just lip work. And sometimes people just don't want to hear it, and sometimes it's because they're afraid that they don't know what to do. Because almost, it's invariably, we'll do a training, we'll do a drill, and the people who are the most resistant at the end, okay, we gotta do that again. Because they're comfortable now, and they understand it, so it's just really repetition.
Yeah, and second that is, part of it is also listening to your audience, right? So okay, it's checking box, so why? Why do you feel that way? And kind of understanding how you can adapt yourself, right? Because communication is not what it's not what you heard or what I said, that's what you understood. So I might feel like we communicated something very well, but if they didn't grasp it, then it was, in essence a failure, in that sense of trying to communicate that. So listening to them, understanding how adapting, changing things, no different than coaching a U6 soccer team, right? It's like, you gotta keep happy, keep them going, moving along, you teach them one thing at a time, you slowly build it up, right? And then eventually when they get to the game, they'll do great.
Go ahead.
To augment the question that was back here before about the first thing we talk about is we think of natural disasters, and then complement what was up here, and it's to repeat what you guys covered. I encourage us, first of all, it's community. Everybody that's here tonight is taking a proactive approach, so I applaud all of us, and thank you for your speech. But very free in the community of hospital, first responders, the community, et cetera, and something like knocking on doors, doing urine samples, et cetera. I'm listening. But things that, and I'm a 12-year Marine Corps veteran, so to Jose, you had fire rescue, et cetera. So PMD, practice makes perfect. What are the 5 P's? Prior preparation prevents poor performance or piss poor performance. So there's your close. But my ask of us is to expand upon what you said, the natural events, the Formula One, as I was speaking to you this evening. Natural ice event the other day on Saturday, everything was good, and then the poo-poo hit the fan, right? In that moment, that pause resulted in a fatality and a lot of trauma, right? So what would I encourage us to do in practicing this and the monotony, that's why we went about the Marine Corps, that as soon as you wake up in the morning, you put on your shoes, you know what you're doing. As soon as you're going to do it, you're going to be breathing. What can we do in making sure that we're looking at in the healthcare facility to the disaster events, right? The importance of the interoperability of communications, you touched on it, from the field to the hospital so that we have a community. We know what the right hand is doing, what the left hand is doing, and that communications infrastructure that, and you had mentioned about SIMS, right? Diversity, or carrier diversity, so that when those things occur as a hospital, when the first responders are coming out, or you're going out to do that, that's part of that infrastructure. And I brought that up so that you can expand upon that for the team.
Yeah, I'll start off. I mean, it's kind of repeating kind of what we said earlier. You touched it on point perfectly. It's repetitive. Muscle memory is a key. And that muscle memory, what it does is it encourages you and it teaches you how to do like that OOD system, you know, that orient yourself to decide and act. And that is when you train staff on a constant basis on how to do that. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of practice and patience, but and legwork, outreach, and so forth. And collaboration with leadership, buying in on doing that. But that's where I think it falls into, is making sure that you're able to do that constantly on a day-to-day basis. It's hard. And staff all the way from the top to the bottom, getting all staffs involved. I think that's where it comes to, is muscle memory. You know how to. You guys want to elaborate on that?
Yeah,
small training.
Yeah, it's just small drips, right, and looking at certain objectives, right? So I've done even incident command trainings that involve some elements similar to like an escape room, right? And even though that has nothing to do with maybe what it is, it's the communication portion is what I'm looking for, the collaborative portion is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking necessarily to address, space insurance or anything. Now I'm looking to see how we can work together and talk together. And that's what we're going to focus on today, and that's what we're going to do in the escape room type activity. And then the next time we meet, we'll do something else, right? And we'll hit all these different things, but it's changing it up a little bit as well to keep people engaged. Because if not, if it's just that routine as well, and it's good, it also, that's where you also have sometimes mistakes. Because, I'm used to it. Every single day that door's open, and there's a door to that door, and some day the door's not there. So that's it's having a little bit of changing along the way as well.
His escape rooms are pretty cool. I gotta say, this is a great activity.
And we do just have.
Or you get fatigue as well.
Right.
The fatigue issue too is a thing too. If you train too much, you may get message fatigue. You may get redundancies where people get tired and say, "Oh God, we're doing another active shooter drill." But if you do that, and then you said you switch it up a little bit, you keep them engaged. You keep them still willing to participate.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to add that we are almost out of time, so I know there was another question, and there are more. Maybe perhaps you guys would be available just afterwards a little bit. I'll just see if you can Do you have any final remarks as we wrap up? And I just thank you all for your questions and for participating. I do know there's at least a couple more. I apologize, but more than welcome to come up afterwards or engage. So, any final thoughts as you guys wrap up for the evening?
Thank you everyone for coming to Broward Health That's it.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all. I'm not sure if there's any final remarks from our leaders and our planners here, but I do appreciate everyone's attention. And I know that I learned a lot. I had some key takeaways, and I had a lot of repeated things that I'm sure you guys can put into practice. So thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you guys so much. It was a really, really great panel. It was great listening and learning from you guys. I mentioned the QR code. We have some that printed out there. We would really appreciate you take a survey. Tell us what you thought of tonight's event. Give us some feedback on what you'd like to see for a future event. Thank you guys so much for coming. We always appreciate you guys coming to our events. And as I mentioned, if you haven't followed us on LinkedIn, where's Adrian? Adrian wants more followers for LinkedIn. So follow us on LinkedIn, fill out our survey, and I hope to see you guys next week at our event. Thank you so much.